I spent $700 on this beast of a Wi-Fi 7 router to get better speed and range at my house. So was it worth that crazy price tag? And what is the difference between Wi-Fi 6, 6E, and 7? Well, let's get into that and the really weird things that I found in all of my detailed testing. This is TP-Link's flagship router and it is insane. As you guys can see, it has internal antennas and it has a ton of ports, including two 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. It's got 4 2.5 gig connections and multiple USBs. And size-wise, it is a behemoth compared to my Wi-Fi 6 router. And not too long ago, I purchased an Asus Wi-Fi 6E router that I tested out, and I had some decent results, but it had reliability issues. And with Wi-Fi 7 coming out right around the corner, I decided to just return it and wait. So what are the differences? Well, Wi-Fi 6 has been out for a long time, and 6E mainly added the 6 gigahertz band, which is supposed to give you much faster speeds and have less interference issues because most other devices are on the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequency. So if you have a ton of neighbors, or you're in apartments, having that 6 gigahertz band is really nice. There's only one issue with that though, and that is that the range is not as good as 5 gigahertz and then 2.4. So in reality, it's not that big of an upgrade, but I did see range improvements and speed improvements even with my regular Wi-Fi 6 devices. But Wi-Fi 7 takes this to a whole nother level. The maximum data rate jumps up to 46 gigabit per second compared to 9.6 with Wi-Fi 6 and 6E. So how is such a big jump possible? Well, there are multiple reasons. The first one is the 320 megahertz bandwidth, which basically doubles the bandwidth. To make it simple, it's kind of like having a 2-lane freeway compared to a 4-lane freeway. So you can fit more there. With that, you can actually pack more data into each vehicle that is driving on that freeway. With that, you have 16 by 16 MIMO, so you have double the simultaneous connections that are possible. And if you have interference, instead of that block being wasted, it can actually resume really quickly. And I think the coolest thing by far is the multi-link operation. Ever since we had multiple Wi-Fi frequencies, you can only connect to one of them at a time. But with Wi-Fi 7, you will be able to connect to multiples, and then your data will be sent through whichever frequency is working the best, which is gonna make it a lot more seamless. But with that said, Wi-Fi 7 has not yet been certified and finalized, and even though I could buy this insane router, it's not completely set. So some of these features like this one, they are not working just yet. And then later on, there are gonna be firmware updates that will enable it. And then of course, there are almost no Wi-Fi 7 devices that are out yet. So why would I even buy one of these? Well, one issue that I had is my security camera that is in my driveway entrance, which is quite far. Well, the video quality is terrible because the reception and range is bad, so you're not getting the full 1080p quality, and if somebody was to go steal my package, I don't think I'd be able to even see their license plate with that kind of a signal. Now, most people, including myself, don't upgrade their Wi-Fi routers very often, maybe every 5 to 7 years. So my idea was to buy the best, latest router that I can, and then once the devices catch up, I will get those extra features, but for now, I will get some better speed and better range. I spent $350 on my Wi-Fi 6 router about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a similar situation. That was when that was just coming out. And surprisingly, now it's about $200 and people are still buying it and giving it great reviews. And it worked well previously, but in this newer home that has a larger property, that's where I am struggling. So what results did I get with these different routers? Well, let's start out with that front yard that I mentioned. My Wi-Fi 6 router would only get 17 megabit per second down and 4 up. Upgrading to the Wi-Fi 6E router, that bumped me up to 36 download and my full 15 upload, which was a nice bump, but the Wi-Fi 7 router got me to 72 megabit per second download, and then the full 15 up. So that right there achieved the goal that I wanted to achieve. But we had some complications, unfortunately. Now, right above my router, I tested out my maximum speed, and I went from 705 up to about 1099 and 1096. I tested both of the higher end bands for the new routers, and then the Wi-Fi 7 router gave me 1157 and 1123 out of my 1200 megabit plan. So that is excellent. Testing in my living room, which is about 10 or so feet away from the router, I went from 663 to about 1100, and slightly actually slower with the Wi-Fi 7 router, which gave me a little bit of concern, but I decided to keep testing. Testing in my basement where my home theater is, I went from 620 up to about 904 and 855, and then with the Wi-Fi 7 router, 1125 and 1041. That is a huge increase in performance, and that was amazing. Now you'll notice that the 6 gigahertz speeds were slightly slower than 5 gigahertz, and that goes back to the 6 gigahertz band having a harder time penetrating through walls and floors. The next spot that I tested was on the couch in my kind of man cave area that I've been remodeling, and here I went from 569 up to 800 and 650 with the Wi-Fi 6E router, and then with Wi-Fi 7, I got 242 and 171, which blew my mind. So terrible, I didn't know what was going on. I did multiple restarts, troubleshooting, tested a different time of day later on to verify, and this was the speed that I was getting, and it did not make any sense. The next spot I tested was a bedroom in the corner of the basement. Here I went from 439 to slightly slower with the Wi-Fi 6E router, and then an appalling 90 megabit per second on the 5 gigahertz band with the Wi-Fi 7 router, and no signal at all for the 6 gigahertz band. And this is where I was really starting to worry. I went to the backyard playhouse area that I built, which is about 115 feet away from the router. Of course, it has to go through the walls. And here it went from 97 down and 5 up to 127 with 15 up on the Wi-Fi 6E router, and then no signal for 6 gigahertz, which makes sense, it's too far. And with the Wi-Fi 7 router, I got 82 down with only 7 up, and then no signal for 6 gigahertz. This was really terrible. Now, when I started to troubleshoot, test out why I was getting such bad speeds, the only thing that made sense is that this huge router has inbuilt antennas, and there's no way for me to adjust anything other than maybe spinning the router around. I can't take one antenna, point it up, one down. It's all built in compared to the previous routers that I tested. So I went ahead and I rotated the router to try to maybe get a different layout for the 12 internal antennas. And in my basement, I went from that 90 up to 224. That was a pretty good improvement, but the issue is outside where I have my camera, and the main reason why I wanted to upgrade to better Wi-Fi, and that is 165 feet away, I went from 72 download, which was awesome, to no signal at all. And I actually had multiple times where I would just get little notifications from my other smart devices that popped up that they were disconnected, which defeated the whole purpose. So I had to rotate it back to get a signal outside, and thus making my signal in the basement a lot worse. Now we also have dual 5 gigahertz bands with this Wi-Fi 7 router, and I did test those out at the start, but my second 5 gigahertz band was actually quite a bit slower, even close to the actual router itself, and then in the home theater, it was less than half the speed. And that's because it's on different channels. There could be more interference. And it doesn't really make sense to me to have those unless you're trying to not have interference. But of course, with speeds that low, it kind of defeats the purpose. And some other Wi-Fi 7 routers that are out there will instead have dual 6 gigahertz bands, so you can use it for a backhaul instead. So that also didn't fix any of my issues because the second band was slower everywhere that I tested. So why was this issue happening? Well, this beast of a router that looks sleek and clean and cool has inbuilt antennas that might work for a lot of people if you're in a smaller home, but I cannot configure it in a way that it works for all the parts of my house. And thus, even though I waited 4 months for this to come out, I cannot use it. And I actually went back to my Wi-Fi 6 router that I bought 5-6 years ago or so, because even though I don't get my full internet speed, at least I have range everywhere. And I'm just gonna have to wait a little bit longer to get a Wi-Fi 7 router that has external antennas that I can position for optimal speeds throughout my whole yard and my house. Or I might have to cough up an insane $1,500 to get a mesh system, which I wanted to avoid in the past because I don't want those things all over and dealing with that. One router with external antennas have always worked for me. So that has been my experience. So do I regret spending $700 on a Wi-Fi 7 router? Yes, and I'm so lucky that by the time I got everything set up and tested, it was actually the last day to get my return label to send it back. And so I did so, and I wasn't planning on doing that, so I wasn't rushing anything to test it out when I got it in, but I'm glad that I still could because I can't deal with not having a connection in certain parts of the house and disconnect issues. So make sure you're careful based on what kind of a home you have, how far you're trying to get a signal, and I learned my lesson that external antennas are great because you can position them. But with that said, the Wi-Fi 7 technology, once it is ready, is absolutely mind-blowing. And if you can afford it, and there's some good options for you to choose from, I would recommend Wi-Fi 7 over 6E and over 6. Thank you guys for watching. Go ahead and click that circle above to subscribe. Check out one of those great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next one.